Hello crafty friends, it's Donna here, and I have another set of 10 cards for you today. This time using the Maizie's Garden paper pack from Paper Rose Studio. There are 6 different double-sided papers in this pack, and you get 3 of each. Before I start making the cards, I'm going to cut apart one of the papers that has the different strips on it, and also I'm going to fussy cut the images from one of the papers that has a whole lot of elements that we can use to decorate the cards. This video is the second video in a set that's using the card sketches from Sandy Allnock's Operation Write Home. I'll put a link to the Operation Write Home sketches below, and I'll also put in the top corner a link to the first video in the series. Today we're going to use sketches 11 through 20 in that order. I'm going to make all these cards in US sizes, and I'm using the Paper Rose Studio US sized card bases. We have a nice simple sketch to get us started. I've chosen the pink background paper for the bottom and the beautiful delicate floral for the top. I had a little piece from my cuttings that was not quite wide enough, but since the middle's going to be covered, I've just cut that in half and split it so that everything you see will be just fine. So that my next layer doesn't sag, I'm just going to fill in that little piece that's left behind with a scrap of extra paper, and you'll see me doing that throughout all the cards, building up the layers so that everything sits nice and flat. For that lovely long strip down the card, I've chosen one of the papers with the long strips of design. I'm going to add a little strip of the deep burgundy paper to each side of this beautiful flower strip, and then add a happy birthday sentiment. The happy birthday sentiment is sitting half on and half off that long panel, which I've popped up with foam tape. And so I'm adding extra dimension to the right hand side to build it up to be the same height as the left. Sketch number 2 uses my favourite paper from the whole collection, a beautiful watercoloured leaf and nut paper. First of all, I'm layering up the background. In all cases, each layer has a 1/16 of an inch all of the way around, which is about 1.5 millimeters. When I'm doing the maths for cutting, that 1/16 of an inch left and right together makes 1/8 of an inch. So in the case of the background for this card, the card is a standard 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch card. The green paper is 4 1/8 by 5 3/8, and then the yellow paper is 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. That way each layer gets a beautiful little border around it. Sketch number 3 has a nice big panel on the left and then a sentiment which for this sketch is written on the diagonal. But I'm not a fan of diagonal sketches, and this sketch is not the boss of me, and so I'm not going to do it. One of the papers in this pack has a really beautiful wreath. Unfortunately, it's too big for the card, so I'm cutting away some of the wreath and leaving enough that I still get that beautiful circle. My sentiment is going to go on straight. And to replace the small square in the right hand side, I've added a little fishtail tag. As well as the B-sides in this pack, I've used copper shimmer paper as the background for quite a few of these cards. I thought the tones matched beautifully. Those of you who've seen my videos before know that I'm a fan of using up as much as I can, including the cover sheet for my papers, and I'm going to use the red strip from the cover to make my tag. You may have a die to do this. If you don't, you can do what I did. I simply cut in a small snip from one end right in the middle of the card, and then cut from the 2 corners into that middle slit. I find that's the best way to get a nice even fishtail banner. Sketch number 4 has presented me with the joy of more diagonals, but we're working with it. I've decided to turn this sketch sideways, and one of the reasons was I had a beautiful maple leaf die that I thought would match so well with these papers, but the die was slightly wider than it is high. Once again, I've had to deal with a difference in height, where the two top layers hung off the edge of that central strip. That's easy enough. For the straight panel, you can flip it over and what sits on the edge will still be on the edge when you flip it. For the diagonal panel, I was careful to flip it, holding the two outside corners so that I would remember which way to add the extra layers behind. For sketch 5, I once again used one of the border strips, but this time I fussy cut along one edge of it and popped that up with some foam tape. I've chosen the sentiment "I'm so grateful" and added some more of the little cutouts. I tried where I could to match the scale of the cutouts so that the basket is the biggest one, followed by the pumpkin and then the pear and so on. But that little thing on the right hand side, I'm not so sure about. Sketch number 6 was incredibly simple. So I decided I'd like to add a spattered watercolour panel. I cut the panel using a stitched rectangle die from watercolour paper. I then got out some metallic paints. I had a copper and a gold. Because I was intending to use the copper shimmer paper for my background, I wanted to match the colour, and so I mixed a little copper with a little gold until I got the colour right, testing it on the edges that were left behind from cutting out that border. I then made a mix that was fairly thick but still just thin enough to spatter, and had a whole lot of fun all over the panel. I was very careful to spatter, especially on the right hand side, because I knew that was what would remain once I'd covered it up with the patterned papers. Once again, my favourite paper has made an appearance. Sketch number 7 is also a nice simple sketch, and for this sketch I used the paper that showed me what those wagon wheel type things were. Still not entirely sure, but at least I got an idea of what the scale of them should have been. I chose a couple of very pale papers and a small sentiment that just said hugs. Really love this next sketch with its 3 squares at the top, and I chose to use 3 different colours of the backs of the papers. I'm once again using my piece of paper technique for lining things up. I have a T-square ruler, I know where it is, but old habits die hard. I'm going to turn this next sketch on its side as well. So far I've been able to use the backs of the paper and also some paper in my stash. But by now I'm running low of some of the darker colours that I want. But here's the thing, you don't have to own every colour of paper there is. Especially for these backgrounds, where only a tiny sliver is going to be showing, there are plenty of ways to work around it. And here's one. You can use a marker to just colour in the edge of the paper. I'm using a Copic marker and the chisel end because that's the quickest and easiest, but actually any marker would do if you can find the right colour. This way, I'm able to make a nice deep dark burgundy that will perfectly frame my pieces. I decided I'd like to have a little bit of a play with perspective. When I chose my elements for my feature panel, I found the biggest pear and the smallest lantern, so that nothing is the size it should be. I don't know if anybody will ever notice, but it gave me a giggle. Finally, sketch 10, and I'm really out of background papers. Some of my most time-consuming fussy cutting was of the 2 big bouquets, and so I thought I'd like to use at least one of them in a card. screen panel was originally going to be yellow, but somebody wasn't watching what they were doing and they glued it down the wrong way. There was no more yellow paper left in the pack, and so a replacement had to be found. I'm going to leave you with just a couple of photos of the finished cards. You've seen most of them already, so we'll just do a couple of family shots. There is a coordinating blog post over at donnaisplayingpaper.com, and I will link to that below, as well as to the site where you can find the sketches and to the supplies that I've used in this video. I always try and find links in different regions in the hope that you'll be able to find what you want with a minimal postage cost. I hope you've enjoyed this set of 10 cards from one paper pack, and that you'll be back to see the next instalment. Until next time, I wish you joy, and I'll see you again soon.